There are many things that Andromeda didn't do well. There are several elements of Andromeda that weren't realized as well as they could have been. Potentially good concepts that just weren't executed well enough. Beyond that, however, there were some bad design choices. Now, I want to be clear right from the start about this distinction. When I say bad design choices, I mean deliberate choices made by the team that were executed successfully in the sense that they ended up roughly how the development team planned them. To be absolutely clear, what I'm not talking about are any perceived plot holes or problems with the story, poor open world design, clunky dialogue bugs, unforeseen technical issues, boring side quests, or anything like that. Those are all problems with the game, no doubt. But that's not what I'm talking about, and the reason why I'm not talking about those issues is because they're obvious. We all know that stuff already. It doesn't bear repeating. But moreover, those are things that by this point the developers also know. They know full well they didn't design the open world that they wanted to. They know full well that the companions in Andromeda aren't as compelling as the parties in other BioWare games of the past. They set out to make something great, they missed the mark in certain areas, and so they couldn't fulfill their lofty ambitions. But that's different than making a poor design choice and then successfully implementing that choice. We're talking about a difference similar to the difference between getting up in front of a crowd to give a speech and messing up your words, accidentally saying the wrong thing, versus getting up in front of that same crowd and delivering a well-polished speech, except you chose the wrong message to deliver. I'm not going to pick on BioWare for writing some clunky dialogue. I'm sure they tried to write better dialogue, and in some places it just fell flat. Sad story, try again next game and do better. But what I will harp on specifically are a handful of choices that I think need to be different in the next Mass Effect game in order for the franchise to live up to its full potential. With that said, let's talk about design choices in Andromeda that need to go. First up is not including real-time pause in combat and not including the ability to issue specific commands to squad members. This is a massive miss to me. I know the combat in Andromeda is one of the most often praised aspects of the game. In fact, overall combat is one of the things that I mentioned in my most recent Andromeda video. But the success of the combat as a whole is in spite of, not because of, the lack of real-time pause. Real-time pause and specific squad commands in the original trilogy are key parts of what set Mass Effect apart from typical run-of-the-mill third-person shooters. The biotics and tech abilities and the combo detonations are at the core of that unique Mass Effect gameplay loop. But very important to that unique gameplay is the ability to pause the action and issue commands. It's great to survey the battlefield for a second or two, issue a couple of commands, and then resume, and for those that really don't like it, they can avoid using it with little repercussion. Companion combat AI in Mass Effect has never been stellar, but in the past that could be somewhat remedied by issuing a robust amount of commands to squad mates in order to manage them effectively. In Andromeda, you can order the squad to move, regroup, and attack, and that's pretty much it. They don't carry multiple weapons, so you can't have them switch based on situation, and you can't order them to use specific abilities. This, to me, severely limits the effectiveness of your team. You no longer feel like you're truly in command of a squad, and the squad mates, consequently, are far less enjoyable to have along in combat because you don't get that immediate satisfaction of ordering them to use Incinerate or Concussive Shot and then seeing it happen right away. The logic behind removing the real-time pause, according to the developers, was to synchronize the combat feel between single and multiplayer, but that never made sense to me since in games known for their multiplayer, the single-player campaign always plays a little different. Anyone who's ever played a Call of Duty single-player campaign can attest to the fact that it plays nothing like a multiplayer match. Granted, having real-time pause included is a more extreme version of that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with having a distinct single and multiplayer-styled combat. The next thing that I think absolutely needs to change is the lighter tone that the game took. Again, I want to stress that I feel this is a design choice, not a criticism of the execution. Even if the more upbeat, lighter feel to the setting and the story and the characters was executed perfectly, which it wasn't, I still wouldn't prefer that to the more serious, higher stakes tones of the first three games. Even if BioWare gave us Guardians of the Galaxy 1 or Deadpool level of humor, which they definitely didn't, that still wouldn't be the best thing for Mass Effect. Part of the appeal of Mass Effect is high stakes, life or death choices, complicated political machinations, military conflicts, and galactic level threats. Characters that you've come to know and care about live and die based on your choices in Mass Effect. Even when there are lighter fanfare type storylines, they're used sparingly. I don't know where the decision came from to move away from a serious tone and into a comedic one, but it never feels truly at home with Mass Effect. Writers' attempts at humor often fall flat, but even in moments when the game is being successful with its humor, Liam's loyalty mission or a particular psychedelic adventure on Kadara, for example, It still feels like you're playing a funny diversion, not what you expected from the core of a Mass Effect game. With the success of Disney and Marvel, I'm really concerned that BioWare, like a lot of other storytellers, are getting caught up in what is ultimately going to be a momentary trend. They're trying really hard to be thought of as upbeat. I feel like someone needs to give them permission to go back to what made the trilogy work well in the first place. It's okay to have a military setting, it's okay to have more older, more jaded characters. It's okay to have a young protagonist that acts mature for their age. It's okay to have life or death choices with companions. It's okay to have a story set around war and the brutal loss that's unavoidable as a consequence of war. We don't just want the fanfare, we want the tougher, more morally gray storylines that make the denouement feel like such well-earned catharsis. And on that note, let's talk about our third point, and that is how our relationships grow with the companions. This point is very closely related to the one that we just finished. In Andromeda, BioWare takes the saccharine sitcom finale style of fanfare that works so well in something like the Citadel DLC for Mass Effect 3 and pours it on thick for an entire game. We were so ready to go on a bombastic adventure with our companions from the original trilogy. We wanted gratuitous ensemble shots and cheesy "I've got your back" lines of dialogue because we had spent so much time with these characters that the melodrama of saying goodbye in that way actually felt earnest, even if it was exaggerated at the same time. Whereas in Andromeda, it's the exact opposite. Because the relationships are so new, even if they try not to make it as saccharine, it still feels forced. It's like being introduced to a new person who's hanging out with you and your friends and keeps trying to slap you on the back and comment about the good old days and all the great memories you have together, but you only just met them. Even if they're sort of an alright dude, it's weird that they keep insisting on a familiarity that isn't really there. I've said this before elsewhere, but it's very important to make note of the fact that at the end of the first Mass Effect game, Garrus isn't really your friend. Rex isn't really your friend. Even if you do their personal quests, you really only get to a level of mutual respect, professional courtesy. If you don't believe me, go back and listen to the last conversation you can have on board the Normandy with Garrus. He thanks you for helping him with Dr. Salion and says that he appreciates your help. That's it. Professional courtesy. Thank you for helping me handle this, let's go get Saren. It's pretty much the same for Rex and Tali as well. The only person on board the crew of the Normandy that you can develop more than a friendly professional rapport with is the person that you romance. If you don't romance Ashley, she sees you as a respected commander. If you don't romance Caden, he expresses some admiration for your command prowess, but that's still not a deep personal friendship. The only way to not romance Liara in ME1 is to stiff-arm the hell out of her, so in that case you also end up with a platonic, somewhat cool professional relationship. Mass Effect wasn't trying to make a friendship simulator in the beginning. It was putting you and a crew of strangers into a tough situation and giving you the option of developing your bonds with them as a team on a mission. Those are two very different things. The latter is built to naturally hinge on the crucial aspects of the plot, meaning that the natural course of the character relationships is to grow tighter due to tough circumstances, while the former is doomed to feel forced because it assumes the player is there to hit A for friendship. In future Mass Effect games, you should be able to skip or refuse most squad mates from joining your team. You should be able to ask squad mates to leave, especially if they do something like disobey orders during a story moment. You should be able to lose certain squad mates if you do something that they don't approve of during a story moment, and you should be able to lose squad mates to severe injury, death, or even betrayal during the course of the story. If your relationships with these characters are optional, and if their success is not guaranteed, that means you could miss some things or mess some stuff up. But that's specifically why the payoff is so good when you do recruit everyone and balance the varied ideals and goals of your crew to build a strong working relationship with each of them. It's satisfying because it's believable and because it isn't guaranteed. Fourth on the list is Sudoku. Just don't put Sudoku in any more Mass Effect games. Definitely don't do that. The only people that like Sudoku are playing it somewhere else. We don't need it jammed into the critical path of a Mass Effect game. Thank you. Fifth on our list is story structure and pacing. Now again, this is one that could be construed as more execution based, but here's why I think it's at least partially a design decision. Because actually a majority of quests that are not a part of the critical path can be finished after beating the main storyline. On paper, you might think that that's fine, or even think that it's a really good thing, but it actually presents a problem from a pacing standpoint. Although this isn't the only way to balance out main and side plots, oftentimes you want your side plots to be related to the main plot in a way that's sequential. In other words, you want early side stories to work synergistically with the early part of the main plot, and later side stories to have the same relationship with the later parts of the main plot. This definitely happens some of the time in Andromeda, particularly early on when you first reach the Nexus and Eos, but shortly after reaching Aya, the game opens up into a massive second act and gives you access to virtually all remaining side content in a very short period of time. So from the early middle portion of the game all the way through the post-game, the side content just feels like one huge content dump that doesn't seem to mesh well with the main plot anymore because it's not really designed to. The side content from the second act on is designed to be played at any time, so it never really feels connected to a central story anymore. This leaves most players feeling unsure about what they should be doing. You can get off of Havarl and Vold by only doing one mission on each planet, and once you're on Kadara, you don't even have to do a full mission to get what you need and leave. Then you can completely ignore Eladin. Seriously, you can completely ignore an entire planet, and then start the endgame without any arcs found, loyalty missions done, or settlements established beyond the first one on Eos. With that much side content being optional and only loosely affiliated with what's happening on the critical path, only one of two things can happen. Either the main plot has urgency to it and you feel compelled to push ahead skipping side content, or the main plot doesn't have urgency and you end up deciding to do the side content but quietly wondering to yourself why you're not doing the main plot anymore. The game tries to emphasize that you can do all this side content after beating the Archon, but most players will just feel like they beat the game already. Post-game content is great, but your post-game content shouldn't be your leftover side content. Side content should have synergy with the main content that it accompanies, and post-game content should meaningfully add context to the story after the conclusion of the main plot. Now granted, this is a very tough problem to crack. Many writers in all sorts of different mediums and genres have to deal with pacing issues, and sometimes it can be an elusive problem to try and fix. Sometimes it feels like no matter what you cut or change in your story, some part of it always feels uneven. I have to admit that of everything on this list, this is probably the closest to being execution-based and not just a design choice. However, I have a solution from BioWare's own catalog that basically shows BioWare knows how to deal with this problem better than they did in Andromeda. And that's Mass Effect 2. You see, Mass Effect 1 actually suffers from almost the exact same problem as I just described with Andromeda. It's a smaller scale for sure, but it's ostensibly the same issue. The second act is either way too long or too short, and you're never sure which is the more authentic version of the story. Mass Effect 2 is brilliant in that it introduces a mechanism, a plot device, that perfectly addresses this problem, namely building the ultimate team to go on an impossible suicide mission. Because of this plot device, you never feel like doing side content is detracting from the urgency of the main plot, but rather, the side content is deriving its own urgency from the urgency of the main plot. You feel like you have to be doing these recruitment and loyalty missions because of the main plot, while at the same time somehow feeling like you have the freedom to choose to do them and in what order. This is a really good way to address the need for urgency in both the main plot and the side content. Now, I know that you can't just have a suicide mission in every game, so that begs the question, what plot device could Andromeda use to have this same sort of solution? I have an answer for that, however, it's going to take too long to fit into this video, so keep an eye out as that'll be the next video in theory that I'm working on very soon. In the meantime, let's wrap up this video with our last item on the list, and that's Character Creator. I absolutely do think that BioWare set out to make a good character creator, but the reason why I place this in the bad design choice category is because of the technical limitation that BioWare placed on themselves for this aspect of the game. Unlike Dragon Age Inquisition, which came out right before Andromeda, BioWare chose to use different real-life face models for each of the different character presets. This was apparently a choice made early on, supposedly to take advantage of the better facial animation technology, and we pretty much all know how that worked out. But the side effect of this choice was having to severely limit the options available in character customization. Whereas in DAI, you could literally sculpt almost every feature of a character's face, in Andromeda you really only had 10 face shapes to choose from, with some ability to tweak dimensions. This led to a lot of writers that looked very similar to one another, and none of which animated all that great anyway. In future BioWare games, I really hope they return to the DAI method of facial animation and character creation, The AI may not have had the most renowned facial animations, but they certainly didn't draw the ridicule of Andromeda, and they also weren't the key reason behind limiting the character creator. Players were able to make unique-looking Inquisitors that they related to more as a result. If we have to sacrifice on the latest in performance capture animations, that's a worthwhile trade-off to me. As I said in my last Andromeda video, another Mass Effect game is coming, that much is certain. And there are many lessons that can be taken from Andromeda. Included in those lessons are things done well, some of which I covered in my last video. But learning is seldom so simple as to take stock of all your good ideas. Rarely is it so painless as to simply recount what you already know. It's often messier than that and includes a lot of reflecting on mistakes made. Hopefully BioWare has done that in earnest, and we all won't have so many things to say about squandered potential and missed opportunities the next time a Mass Effect game comes out. This has been The Exalted March, a conversation about storytelling and design in video games. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button, and if you'd like to be informed of all future videos, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I teased a concept about how to fix the pacing issues in Andromeda, and that's actually an idea that I have had for a long time. Almost as soon as I played Andromeda for the first time, I realized that it was there, and after multiple playthroughs, both long and short, I feel like I finally understand the root of the problem well enough to tackle solving it. So keep an eye out for that video. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at The Exalted March. As always, thank you for watching, and thanks for listening.